Well, thank you very much, Vol, for that really kind introduction. It's so wonderful to see everyone here, to be here in person. I too want to thank Jennifer Cauble and the amazing team from our alumni office for organizing this event and for enabling us to stay in touch with each other during these past 2 very challenging years. I also want to thank the faculty who participated in the symposia and the talks this morning. You've gotten a glimpse of why we're all so excited about our future because of our amazing faculty and students and staff that are so dedicated to our mission and to what we do here at Stanford Medicine. You know, I've oftentimes been asked over these past 2 long years, you know, how am I doing? And I've been doing, I think, really well overall. And why? It's because of the amazing people that I work with every day. I'm not at all surprised, but I'm so impressed and inspired by the dedication, by the diligence, the devotion of our faculty, our staff, our students, everyone in the Stanford Medicine and Stanford University community. I think also one of the silver linings, if you will, of the pandemic is that, you know, crises either bring organizations together or drive organizations and people apart. And I think for this crisis, the crisis really did serve to bring us together, us in Stanford Medicine, and also to deepen the ties between Stanford Medicine and the rest of Stanford University. You know, during the first year of the pandemic, Persis Drell, our provost, and I spoke every evening, 7 days a week at 6 p.m. to make sure that we were in contact with each other about what was going on in our community, on our campus, in our healthcare delivery system. Now we're speaking twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. But still, it's deepened our connections across the university in ways that I think will enable us to accomplish even more in the years ahead as we hopefully get back to having sustained activities like the ones that we're having here today with the talks and the lunch today and then the dinner tonight. I would like to just say a few words about what's going on, maybe under the heading of persevering during or through a pandemic. We've done a lot, I think, during the pandemic to strengthen our ties with our community. And here are just a few of the facts and statistics about that. But from the very earliest days, we were one of the first institutions in the country to get emergency use authorization from the FDA for the PCR test used to detect the SARS-CoV-2 virus. We got that emergency use authorization, I think it was on March the 2nd. And we diagnosed our first case of COVID in our hospital just a few days later on March the 6th. And for a very critical period during March and through most of April of 2020, we were doing the bulk of the SARS-CoV-2 testing in the Bay Area, including for other hospitals and healthcare systems like UCSF and Kaiser and Sutter in the Bay Area, and partnering very closely with the community health departments in the counties of the Bay Area. And we've done over 1 million PCR tests through our lab, our clinical lab at Stanford Healthcare for the SARS-CoV-2 virus thus far during the pandemic. And that rapid scale up enabled us to serve our communities and to provide rapid diagnosis. When vaccines became available, we opened vaccination sites around the Bay Area, in San Jose, in areas of San Mateo County, in the East Bay. We staff them. The health departments provide the vaccine, but we staff them and provide the follow-up to the people receiving vaccinations. And through our public presence and our presence with boards of supervisors and other governmental organizations in the region and the state, I think we've provided valuable expertise and consultation to our governmental leaders who have faced some incredibly daunting challenges and decisions during these past 2 years. We've also donated antigen tests to underserved areas. You know, one of the stark realities of this pandemic is that it's underscored the inequities in health and healthcare that have always existed in our country, but that became so painfully evident during COVID-19. We've wanted to look at what we can do in our communities to address those inequities, and one of the things we've been able to do is to provide testing, both PCR testing and make available at no cost antigen test kits. Early on in the pandemic, our scientists leaned in and asked how could they, through their expertise, be doing research and developing technologies that would impact the course of the pandemic and hopefully serve to predict or forestall the development of pandemics in the future. Among the things that our scientists have done are Peter Kim, who is a professor of biochemistry here. Peter got his PhD from Stanford a number of years ago. He went on, became a professor at MIT, and then was the head of global research and development for Merck for a decade prior to coming back to Stanford to join our faculty now about 7 years ago. While at Merck, Peter led the development of Gardasil, the HPV vaccine. So he's an expert in vaccine development. Early in the pandemic, Peter contacted me and said, you know, I have an idea for a vaccine that I think could be as effective as the then emerging mRNA vaccines, but that would not have the cold chain requirements or some of the other difficult requirements that may make it difficult to scale vaccine rollout, particularly in the developing world. So through the aid of our philanthropic community, we were able to support Peter's work in collaboration with other faculty such as Joe DeSimone, who's an expert in nanoparticles on our faculty. And they now have a vaccine that's a nanoparticle-based vaccine that is effective when given in the intradermally. It doesn't require an intramuscular injection. It has no cold chain requirement. And the nanoparticles can be impregnated on the tines of, many of you remember smallpox vaccination and the way there were these preformed devices that you just prick the skin, and that delivered the vaccine. Well, the vaccine that they've developed here can be administered in a similar way. That will be entering clinical trials soon, and if it is as effective in humans as it has proven to be in the animal studies, it'll be a dramatic boost in our ability to roll out affordable, safe vaccinations throughout the world. The messenger RNA vaccines, which are amazing, among the most effective vaccines ever developed, it's always going to be hard to get those into the developing world because of their cold chain requirement. They have to be administered intramuscularly, and there's just a number of complications that the vaccine that Peter and Joe DeSimone and others developed will get around. We also, for many years, have had a group at Stanford interested in understanding human immunology, how vaccines produce immunity. And that group went into high gear during COVID to look at the immune response to the virus itself and the immune response to vaccination. From this work already, we know a lot more about the cellular basis of the immune response. You know, we've always thought of the immune response as being related to antibodies, and antibodies are the first line of the immune response. But there's also a cell-based long-term memory response to vaccines that's been studied far less. So Bali Palundran, who's on our faculty, and Mark Davis and others are analyzing these cell-based responses to understand them better and also determine how the cell-based responses can be augmented to provide longer lasting immunity in the future, longer than just the presence of antibodies, the titers of which do wane over time, as we're all very much aware given the COVID booster situation. I mentioned before that certainly one of the sad facts of COVID-19 has been its disproportionate impact, both in terms of incidence and mortality among communities of color and among disadvantaged communities. That observation, coupled with the murder of George Floyd, led David Entwistle, Paul King, and I to come together and to say enough is enough. That as leaders, we wanted to hold ourselves accountable for having impact in diversity, equity, and inclusion and addressing the historic inequities in health and healthcare that have existed in our country. We formed a commission on justice and equity, and in June of last year, that commission delivered its report and made a number of recommendations. One of those recommendations is to recruit a chief diversity officer. I'm pleased to say that that search is moving forward, that we have some outstanding finalists, and that in the coming weeks we will be hiring a chief diversity officer who will serve all three entities, the school and the two healthcare delivery systems, adult and children's. And there are a number of other things that came out of that report in terms of how we could incorporate training in disparities in health and healthcare into our curriculum in the medical school. And so we've established a position in the dean's office to look at that curriculum. So for example, in the renal block, when we're teaching renal kidney physiology, then also to teach and to include within that educational module, education on the disproportionate impact of renal failure among communities of color, the causes of that, the differential treatment of it, and the fact that communities of color typically come to dialysis with renal failure much earlier than majority communities. So education about those disparities and what can be done to break them down is an important component of what we want to do as a medical school, and then also making sure that that leads into our delivery system and how we can reach out through our delivery system to provide care to patients that maybe are not living on the peninsula and are not going to be coming to the peninsula for their health care. So for example, with the leadership of Steve Artandi, whom you've heard today about the exciting work going on in cancer, we'll be expanding our clinical trials network and our cancer delivery network to include the East Bay through an affiliation with Sutter and facilities for cancer care in the East Bay. And then the South Bay, where we have a branch of our Stanford Cancer Center, Stanford Cancer Institute in San Jose, but where we're looking to expand the services there. So rather than expecting people to come to us, we want to be looking at how we can come to them and bring the benefit of our clinical trials and of the research and the outstanding care that we provide here into communities that historically have not had access to our services in the past. I did mention the Commission on Justice and Equity and some of the recommendations, including the recruitment of a chief diversity officer, performance reviews and training on diversity, equity, and inclusion, reporting and resolution for incidents when incidents do occur, either in our delivery system, in our School of Medicine. How do those get acted on, investigated, reported back on in ways that are transparent and in ways that improve the culture that we have in our community? As we look forward to the future, I think even before COVID-19, most of us in this room had the impression that this was the century of the life sciences and that there was a convergence. Biology now has become a quantitative discipline, for example. That's enabled there to be a convergence of talent from many, many different fields, engineering, chemistry, focused on complex biological and biomedical problems. About a year ago, President Mark Tessier-Levine asked me to lead a long-range planning process in the future of the life sciences for Stanford University, for the Bay Area, and beyond. One of the things that's come, and we're still in the early stages, this is a comprehensive process. We want it to be inclusive around Stanford and then of other constituents and stakeholders as well. One of the observations that's clear thus far in that process, though, is that the future of the life sciences is going to be defined by the convergence of biomedical science, biotech and medtech, with information science and with technology. and that virtuous triangle of biomedical science, information science, and technology, and leveraging those interactions among the three components of that triangle will define the future. And that as an institution and as a region, the Bay Area, we're ideally suited to leverage those interactions in transformative ways. Within that framework, we've identified three cross-cutting themes that we're pursuing as the initial phase of the initiative on the future of life sciences. And those three themes are synthetic biology in using biology to make things and do things and to alter biology. So synthetic biology, for example, in cell-based therapies for cancer. Synthetic biology, which we're looking at the important area of sustainability in biofuels and using biology to capture carbon and thereby lower the carbon dioxide load on the planet. In making polymers, previously that were manufactured from petroleum-based processes, making polymers from biological processes. So synthetic biology is one area. A second area is artificial intelligence and machine learning to improve our understanding of biology and to improve the efficiency and efficacy of our drug development. So artificial intelligence and machine learning approaches to transforming both biology and also healthcare delivery. And then the third area is focused on genomic medicine and cell and gene therapy, an area that we've made some extensive investments in here at Stanford over the past 7 or 8 years, but I think we're only scratching the surface, both at Stanford and around the world, of what's possible with being able to edit cells and provide correction of the genetic components of diseases that are fundamentally at their heart and core genetic diseases, like cancer, for example, other complex diseases. Almost all of them have some genetic component. In parallel with this planning on the future of the life sciences, we've also been involved in some exciting initiatives that have helped our faculty and our students to expand their impact and to grow their sphere of influence and their ability to do transformative research. One is a new institute that we're a partner in founding. You may have read about it. The public announcement was made on December 15th of last year. It's called the ARC Institute. It's a medical research organization, so it's an independent, nonprofit, 501c3 organization. It will be headquartered in our research park, just off of Page Mill Road on Porter Drive, in the midst of the buildings that we've leased to enable us to expand our School of Medicine research facilities. And you'll hear more about the amazing facilities at Stanford from Dave Lennox, the university architect, in just a few minutes. But the ARC Institute was founded with a very generous series of gifts from the co-founder of Stripe, Patrick Collison, and some of the early investors in Stripe. And it's going to be led by one of our faculty members in the biochemistry department, Silvana Kerneman. And we'll have several Stanford faculty who will have their labs and their research programs based at the ARC Institute. And since the Institute is physically within a cluster of buildings that includes a lot of other School of Medicine faculty, we've been able, therefore, in the research park, to develop a life sciences ecosystem in a relatively small portion of the research park, but one that brings together in a concentrated geographic way a huge amount of talent. And the focus of the ARC Institute is going to be on these complex diseases, cancer being one, but also degenerative neurological diseases, complex diseases that have as one component a series of genetic abnormalities. Now, it isn't just about the genome. Also, these diseases are dependent upon environmental influences and a variety of other things that cause a sequence of events that ultimately lead to the advancement and progression of disease. But the goal of the ARC Institute is to understand those components better so that hopefully the early genetic components could be identified and then using gene editing, changed in a way that either prevents or forestalls the development of the disease. Now, it sounds like space age, dreamy thinking, but who would have thought, even as recently as a decade ago, that we would have technologies like CRISPR to do the type of gene editing that's going on today? I think I look forward in future meetings of our groups to give you further updates on future of life sciences. One of the characteristics of this initiative is that we want to do the very best science and technology as a part of the initiative, but we want equity and inclusion to be embedded within everything we do. We don't want, there's going to be the great science and technology over here, and there's going to be DEI and health equity over here. We want DEI and health equity to be embedded in every initiative that's a part of the future of the life sciences. Because it's only through doing that that we form the type of ecosystem, that we develop the modes of thought that will enable us to have the impact that we need and want to have in health equity and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm really excited about what's going on. Again, it's wonderful to be here in person. I've missed, the Zoom meetings were great in the sense that they were better than not having meetings at all, but there's no substitute for being together. So I would open it up now for your feedback, for any questions you might have, and thank you again for being with us here today. Questions?
This may or may not be the direct question for the medical school, but I have been wondering, there is such a big gap between high school to college and then to medical school. Like, a lot of high school kids are wondering what exactly they should be doing when they're going through high school and then college in order to prepare themselves for research and medical school. There seems to be no path for them, nothing direct, and it just seems to be very, there's not a formula, like, okay, you should do A, B, C, and then you get D. So I was wondering if medical school has anything, for high school kids.
Prior to COVID, and we'll get back to doing this now that we're hopefully, in a new stage of COVID. I don't think we're ever going to eradicate SARS-CoV-2, but in a stage where we can come together like this. But we used to have a series of presentations as a part of an open house day that we would have every fall that talked about preparing for medical school. But in a nutshell, first of all, our medical school admissions committee, led by Dr. Iris Gibbs, our Associate Dean of Medical School Admissions. Dr. Gibbs and her team do a fantastic job of screening thousands of applications. And they're looking for first building an outstanding class and a diverse class. Diverse in terms of race, sociodemographic factors, ethnicity, also diverse in terms of the backgrounds and interests of the students. So yes, there are students in our MD class every year that come from a traditional math science background. There are also students in our class who have been humanities majors, students who have done things after college, such as start an NGO or work in a developing country. But in every case, I think what they're looking for is students who bring a passion, a commitment, and a devotion to what they'll be doing in their lives. And they'll be doing so many different things in their lives. So you're right, I don't think there's one approach or one algorithm or method for getting into medical school. Certainly we're looking for students who do well in their studies, but also students who've thought deeply about their future and why it is that they want to go into medicine and what they hope to contribute from going into medicine. Similarly, I think our PhD programs look for the same thing. Students who have demonstrate a real passion for science and for the scientific discovery process, but also who have given a lot of thought about how their science and their effort will impact society in a broader sense. So I hope that was helpful. Yes?
You mentioned, and I thought it was a great way of phrasing it, that we're trying to bring our wonderful and specialized care to patients, as opposed to necessarily having them come here. And I wonder if maybe you could expand on some of the initiatives that the school, and in conjunction with the hospital, with SHC and with Lucille Packard, is doing to sort of expand, not just outside of the Bay Area and beyond.
Sure. Well, a few of those things are, we did, gosh, it's been now 7 or 8 years ago, we opened the South Bay Cancer Center, which is centrally located in San Jose, and we have clinical trials that we lead in cancer that are administered there at the South Bay Cancer Center. We have faculty who are there seeing patients. Our surgeons work there. So that's something that's local in the community. We have infusion services at South Bay Cancer Center. So our patients that live in San Jose don't have to make the trek to the Palo Alto campus for every one of their appointments. And similarly, what we'll be doing in Oakland reflects that similar goal for people who live in the East Bay area. In addition to those facilities, we've developed a network of care through affiliated practices. So these are physicians that are not employed by the School of Medicine, but they're employed by an independent entity. On the adult side, it's called University Healthcare Alliance. On the children's side, it's called Packard Children's Health Alliance. They're closely affiliated with our faculty. Our department chairs are, broadly speaking, responsible for overseeing their quality and their selection, but they bring Stanford care into communities in the Bay Area. And on the children's side, for example, we now have a Stanford Children's Health physician, pediatrician, located within 10 miles of every home in the Bay Area. So the goal of the network has been that, if you're living in, you're living in Fremont, for example, you don't have to cross the bridge to come here to get your child seen for a well-child visit. There will be a Stanford Children's Health affiliated physician in your community able to provide well-child care. And yes, if your child gets sick and needs the type of services that we have here, for sure, those services and the medical records would be readily available. So I think those are a couple of things that we're doing. In addition to the fact that on both the children's and the adult side, all of these practices and all of these locations are using the same electronic medical record. So if you're seen by a practice in Pinole, your medical records are instantly available everywhere in our network. So if you're coming to the Stanford ED, they're going to know exactly the care that you've been receiving at one of our off-site locations. And that's been such a bottleneck in healthcare in the past, has been the portability of records and being able to see what type of care has gone on elsewhere. Yes? Hi.
Hi, I'm really excited by the vision that you've outlined for Stanford for the coming decade, but I wanted to find out what metrics that you're going to be using to make sure that we hold the system accountable, specifically when we're looking at healthcare disparities. Data seems to suggest that if the physician-patient pair is discongruent waste-wise, that impacts health outcomes. So in order to improve representation and improve outcomes, we do have to increase the representation of physicians of color or from different ethnicities as Stanford physicians, and that's going to be really important in accomplishing the mission that you've outlined. And then make sure that we have the right financial resources and that we have the metrics to hold ourselves accountable. I think that's going to be important as well.
I completely agree with you, and thank you for raising that point. So in our medical school, thanks to the outstanding work that Dr. Gibbs and her colleagues are doing, in our medical school now, We just admitted a class. They still have a few more weeks to make their decision about whether or not they're coming to Stanford. But recently our classes have been around 30% of the students in the entering class are from groups underrepresented in medicine. So that's almost double where it was a decade ago. Also, I agree. Similarly, we've had a similar increase in the proportion of underrepresented minority students in our PhD programs. And for our MD programs, as of last fall, the class that entered last fall, we are now a loan-free medical school. So thanks to a wonderful $50 million gift from the late John Arriaga and our commitment to match that gift with another $50 million, all of our medical students receive the financial aid that they need based upon their calculated need from grants, not from loans. So no medical student from the class that entered in the fall of last year, moving forward, no medical student will have loans factored into their financial aid package. And this is very empowering. Thank you. The average debt from medical school of a graduating medical student in the United States, when you look at all the 151 accredited medical colleges in the United States, the average debt from medical school is around $215,000. That's on top of the debt that most of those students have from their undergraduate experience. So they may be going into their internship or their residency with $400,000 of debt. And that impacts their choice of specialty. It impacts their thoughts about where they're going to live and work. And for sure, it adds to the stress of their lives as they move on through their lives. And in announcing this program and planning this program, we didn't follow the model of some of our East Coast peer institutions. You probably read, there's a lot of attention a few years ago, NYU became a tuition-free medical school for everyone, and that's great. But we didn't go that route. And why didn't we go that route? Well, one thing is that those students who get tuition free, if they still have a lot of financial need, they're taking loans to pay for room and board, to pay for fees. And so they're still graduating medical school with $150,000, $200,000 worth of debt. Even though they didn't have to pay tuition, they had to pay everything else. So we wanted, for anyone who has calculated need, and by the way, it's now 25-30% of our students get full tuition scholarship. And there are others that get absolutely everything paid, again, based upon need. So to us, it didn't seem appropriate that we would give free tuition because kids that are coming to us from families that have means, we think that those families should be contributing to pay tuition. I mean, what greater responsibility is there for us as parents when we have the ability to do so than to pay for our children's education, the most important investment we can make. But we wanted to say, and our financial need calculation is appropriately generous, I think, we wanted to say to students who have need, we're going to take care of everything you need. And for some, that means paying tuition, room and board, fees, and a stipend. Because you're not going to have to take loans to come to our medical school and get your MD degree. So I think that's been empowering, but I agree. So one metric is, what are those students doing? We've increased the enrollment, then what do they do later in life? Are they launching their careers, and are they having impact in creating diverse communities and providing care in communities that historically have not had the benefit of physicians to provide that care? We're also looking carefully at the diversity of our faculty. We've made progress, I think a lot of progress in the past decade in gender representation. Now 47% of our department chairs in the School of Medicine are women. It was 14% a decade ago. We have the highest, thank you. highest proportion of women department chairs of any research-intensive medical school in the United States. But we still have a lot to do in terms of underrepresented minority faculty at all different levels. Part of this medical school initiative is to build the pipeline, but it's not sufficient just to build the pipeline. We also need to be doing a lot more in terms of recruiting and creating the type of inclusive environment that is welcoming to people from historically underrepresented communities in medicine to want to come to Stanford and feel the sense of belonging that's so important and that we want everyone in our community to have. So I think those are a few of the metrics that we can and we will hold ourselves accountable for. Yes?
This is not a profound question, but rather a statement. I've been so impressed this morning with the research and innovation going on at Stanford Medical School, but I am so excited about the diversity, equity, and inclusion commitment and the commitment to health equity, figuring out how we can do better in that realm. And I'm so proud to be a graduate of Stanford Medical School, although many decades ago.
That's great. We're glad you're here, and thank you for your comments.
Thank you for your comments. Does this mean that all of us who took loans and then repaid them? When did the checks start coming from Stanford?
I wish we could look back, but yeah.
Okay, a little irreverence helps. Question, going back 60 plus years ago, Stanford made a commitment to start training physicians to be researchers and academicians.
Right.
And there was considerable pressure on my class to do that. Mm-hmm. And those of us who went into clinical care and skipped the academics after that, we're aware of the differences. What is your perception for the next 10, 15 years of Stanford's relationship with non-academic clinical care for physicians? And how will the other biomedical personnel, the huge diversity now, affect physician availability in the United States, especially through Stanford?
Thank you. Well, a few things. One, we do graduate, I think, the highest proportion of MD PhDs of any medical school. It's about 19% of our graduates get a concomitant or sequential MD and PhD degree here. We also have a program, the Berg Scholars, named in honor of Paul Berg, that enables students to train as physician scientists, and we've raised money to support that program. It's now over 70% of our students spend more than 4 years in medical school. They spend 5 or more years in medical school. Not because we're holding them back, but because they want to do a scholarly project. I think our first responsibility is to train outstanding physicians. And we are a research-intensive medical school. For example, we have not gone the route of many of our peer institutions and reduced our preclinical years to just 1 year. Many of our East Coast peers have done that. We have not. We still have at least 2 preclinical years. Everyone who comes to Stanford Medical School knows that. And they're electing to come here and participate in at least two, some of them lengthen it to 3, preclinical years. So we provide an extensive scientific foundation to medicine. And we hope that many of the students who participate, get the bug and want to make contributions to the scientific future of medicine. But in addition to training great physicians, which is our first goal, I want us to train leaders. And yes, that means physician scientists who are leaders. It means people who perhaps are not going to practice medicine, but who are going to use what they learned here and their leadership skills to lead in other ways. And I want our physicians who are in community-based practices to be outstanding in those communities and to be leaders in those communities. So we try to frame this so that it's not a conflict, and I certainly don't want to create a class system in the medical school where they're the physician scientists or the scientifically focused doctors here and the practice-focused doctors over here. I do think the ecosystem works. We're constantly looking at balancing the two, and Occasionally, does it need to be rebalanced on one side or the other? Yes, and that's something we're always looking to make sure we've got the calibration right. But I do want everyone here, regardless of what they choose to do later on after finishing their medical school, everyone here to feel like there's a place for them and that they're going to find support for their aspirations in medicine, whatever that might be. Okay, Val?